My name's Debbie, but my cultural name is Mindiri, and I am Pilki, Western Nullarbor traditional owner, and very close family connections to Anangu and Spinifex peoples. Both my families suffered from nuclear fallout from the atomic bomb tests that were held at Maralinga, land that sits within our traditional homelands. In the 1950s, at the height of the Cold War, the British government began to explode a series of atomic bombs in the empty Australian desert, containing nothing but a few Spinifex bushes, red dirt, and the howl of dingoes. Or so they thought. It was an empty desert. But a number of minor trials, assessment tests, and experimental programs were held
I don't think so.
up until 1963. That were exploded in a forgotten land far away from Western civilization. This land was not terra nullius, but home to another civilization, one that had lived in the desert for over 20,000 years. But, who are the Anangu, the Spinifex people, the Pilki and Western Nullarbor people? Where are our lands? Because I suppose a lot of people don't really know much about us. So our lands sit above the Great Australian Bight. We are desert people, Spinifex people. We live at Dundundara in the Great Victorian Desert. And so that's our Spinifex people, and my family over in my Anangu family. They live over at Oak Valley, which is much closer to the Maralinga test sites. So Anangu people at Oak Valley. It's just over the South Australian border. Our Pilki lands sit just under Dundundara, and of course our Western Nullarbor people, which includes Carmody, Kanana, Kalgoorlie, which is just east of Kalgoorlie. And from Kalgoorlie, we would travel north to the area surrounding Mulga Rocks and the beautiful sand dunes nearby is women's country, where my father as a child would travel with his mother and other women to the special site of significance, because the sands there are healing sands. It's also part of the Seven Sisters story, and it is a sacred place, and we use the sands to massage and heal, especially after childbirth. My dad remembers playing in the sand dunes and walking nearby where there was a forest of grass trees. My family lived, and still do today, their separate existence in sand plains. Those plains contain the essential fabric of life, our food and water, our tools, our shelter, family and friends, and everywhere our law. And this artwork by the Spinifex people depicts that. Our land is in dune country, and in some areas is covered by a rich and strikingly beautiful mosaic of mallee, myall, oak, cypress and mulga vegetation. For thousands of years, we travelled all through our land for social and cultural, political and religious reasons. We had significant places such as Aldea, my Anangu side of the family where my dad was born. But our way of life was soon to be disrupted. It was 1908 when survey teams commenced work on the route of the new Trans-Australian Central Railway line. The aim was to link the east coast to the west coast of Australia by rail. One day, a group of Spinifex men were travelling when they came across the railway line, and they had never seen steel train tracks before. What is this? They asked themselves. They were amazed. The steel train tracks ran from east to west. They began to debate which way to follow the steel tracks. Suddenly, a steam train appeared. The Spinifex people were scared because they had never seen white man's industrial creations before. They ran and hid behind a sand dune, peering over the top of the sand dune, and they couldn't believe their eyes. This monster, with steam puffing from its nostrils, had eaten people. They could see the people inside of this monster's stomach, and the monster had turned them white. And so began my people's contact with the white man. Uldea had plenty of water there, and it became an important watering point for the steam engines and brought my people into close contact with the railway workers and white travellers who had little conscience and no understanding of Anangu, Spinifex and Western Nullarbor people. But the different groups of people were curious about each other. The white people would hang out of the train windows and look at the black people, and the black people would stand on the side of the train tracks and look back at the white people. It really was a question of who was looking at who. My people learned how to sell artefacts to the white people. It was a new way of trading. Many Italians worked along the railway line and new relationships were formed. Children were born from the Italians and they grew up speaking their own language and Italian. The white train travellers were amazed that these black people were speaking Italian and no English. My people's satisfaction with life suddenly came to an abrupt end. A big community meeting was held at Uldea, and my dumble, my grandfather, was the English interpreter. He told the people they had to leave Uldea. The people were very sad. They were crying and mourning. Mournful wails filled the air. They asked each other, "Where do we go? This is our land. This is our home. We have lived here for thousands of years. This is our tukupa, our law. We have no other home." The people were forced off their homelands and the government gave them no explanation as to why. My people became refugees. They had no cars, they had to walk, and with sad hearts they walked away from Uldea. My Dummel, my grandfather, was given a horse and cart because of the work he did interpreting, and he travelled east, but along the way the wheel broke and he and his family walked. The Jamison family walked to Uldea train station and waited until dark for a train. My people were not allowed to get onto the trains, but the Jamison family sneaked onto a slow-moving train which was travelling west to Kalgoorlie. They and their family travelled west towards Kalgoorlie because the Western Nullarbor was also part of their homelands. In those days, we travelled with fire sticks, and the Jamison family jumped into or onto a empty wooden carriage. They sat on the wooden carriage holding their fire sticks, but soon went off to sleep. As the train picked up speed travelling through the desert night, the fire sticks dropped to the wooden carriage floor. A fire started, and the whole carriage was on fire as the train hurtled into the night. No one heard the screams of the men and women and children as the fire engulfed them. Some people jumped from the train into the dark desert night, never to be seen again, while others were burnt to death. 2 people survived, and today we tell their story. My people did not understand why this was happening to them. The white man's world was a cruel world, a world that showed no humanity. Later, my people found out that the reason they had to move from Uldea was because of that bomb. Yes, the government, along with the British government, was putting plans into action to begin atomic testing at Maralinga. It was 1952, and while people around the world protested, ban the bomb, my traditional homelands were being bombed as the British and Australian governments tested atomic bombs. The Spinifex, Anangu, Pilki and Western Nullarbor people saw strange things and suffered from radiation poisoning and died within their homelands. An auntie told me the smoke was a long way away. It was going straight up. Everyone was coughing, vomiting, and blood was coming out of people's noses and mouths. The family died. They were all very sick. No one could walk. Everyone was just crawling around. All we knew was that the wind had brought this terrible sickness. Crows fell out of the sky. They just dropped. Once we found some rabbits. They were cooked and blackened. We ate them. We didn't know that they were full of radiation poisoning. I should have had an older sister, but she died of the sickness brought by the smoke and the bomb. Other kids died. When some people ate meat and when they drank water, they died. Archival reports provide evidence that the Australian government knew that there were people in the area where the atomic tests took place. Bob Stewart, an American missionary, came out to Australia and set up Kalgoorlie Mission in the 1950s. Kalgoorlie Mission is just east of Kalgoorlie in Western Australia on the edge of the Great Victorian Desert. Bob Stewart said he had a vision to save Aborigines of the Western Desert so I could educate and Christianise them. The Australian government officially asked Mr. Stewart to stop luring people from the bush because their customary way of life should be disturbed as little as possible. The government's refusal to remove people from lands contaminated by nuclear fallout reflected the argument amongst European Australians at the time that the First Nations people living in the bush would disappear or die out. Or would die out because of the progressive onslaught of white superiority in physical, cultural, with the air conditioner on, it dries the air out inside here. The government's refusal to remove people from lands contaminated by nuclear fallout reflected the argument amongst European Australians at the time that First Nation people living in the bush would disappear or die out because of the progressive onslaught of white superiority in physical, cultural, intellectual and Western religious ideologies. But Mr. Stewart continued with what he called rescue missions, where he went out into the desert and brought people into Kalgoorlie Mission. By the close of the 1950s, the British government called on the Australian government to remove and institutionalise Spinifex and Western Nullarbor people. The Australian government now encouraged Bob Stewart, the missionary man, to rescue my people. My Dummel, grandfather and my uncle Brooksy and a group of other Spinifex people said, when Bob Stewart pulled up to say hello, we greeted him with a dance. We were naked, dancing like we saw them white girls dancing naked in the city. The missionary man gave us clothes to wear. And Auntie said, clothing was all wrong. Wrong way, upside down, inside out. We never wore clothes before. We didn't know what to do with them. Uncle Brooksy was walking around with a dress on. The missionary man said, I will come back and get you. Here is some food. He gave them food in a tin. My family never seen tin food before. They thought it was a type of egg, and they tried to crack it open, but it would not open. So they thought, maybe it needs to be killed first, and they took turns spearing the tin meat, but still it would not open. When the missionary man came and got them, it was the first time they had ever been for a ride in a car. The car took off and they were scared to be moving so fast across the ground. One uncle tried to jump off the car, but they held on to him. One auntie was crying in fear, and they were all vomiting with motion sickness. It was a terrible, terrible journey. And when my people tell these stories now, it's done with great humour and laughter and mimicry. So when they arrived at Kalgoorlie Mission, it was even more terrible. Tin shanties, and there was no water. By the 1960s, Kalgoorlie Mission was seen by the Australian government as an important contact point for the Spinifex people and Western Nullarbor people, and saw the settlement as an appropriate centre in which primitive natives could be trained and assimilated into white culture as servants. But there were many problems, such as the isolated position and a serious shortage of water. For my Spinifex family, this was a strange foreign land, and it was a restricted lifestyle full of poverty, lack of water, and people's personalities began to change. There were arguments and fighting. It was a bad place, and no one was happy. We inherited a social disaster. While we understand the reason some of us were removed from our homelands, it is difficult to understand why the government deserted us once we were removed. And the evangelical experience at Kalgoorlie Mission left my people little to be thankful for. Exposure to the Spirit of Christ left us little but the spirit of the hop and grape for consolation. The Australian Evangelical Mission finally accepted defeat. The process of assimilation did not serve my people very well, and so the legacy of the church was left behind. But what a legacy for my people, rescued from the bush and delivered to a concentrated, poorly equipped, underfunded, badly watered, and poorly located settlement on the fringes of Western civilization. We were displaced from our homelands, refugees because of atomic bomb testing, and thousands of our people were laying dead on contaminated desert sands. An uncle told me an old man went back into the desert to look for people, and they were laying dead like ants. When he came back to Kalgoorlie, he died an agonising death 1 week later. People were developing strange diseases, and all their records were kept at the health clinic. But sadly, a fire burnt the health clinic down, and all records were lost. In the 1970s, the Spinifex people told the government they wanted to move back into homelands, but the government did not listen to them. Instead, the government built another community, Kanana. A small group of people went there to live, but the majority of my people, the Spinifex people, voted with their feet. It was a huge exodus, a movement of the people. We got up, stood up, and walked from Kalgoorlie to Yakadunya. It took 6 days to walk, about 25 kilometres a day, which is Yakadunya. It's near Rawlinna, and you might be able to see it's on. It's just east of Kalgoorlie, on the map there. Just north of Tjuma, it is. If you can see Tjuma on the Great Australian Bight. So Yakadunya was regarded as a temporary setup and just a stepping stone back into Spinifex country. A bore for water was put down, and people lived there for about 4 years. Yakadunya is situated, in the northern Nullarbor, and it's actually very, very harsh country, but there was a very good water supply there. The government agencies thought the whole intention for Yakadunya was a place where the old people could go and sit down, and use the place as a base to travel north into Spinifex country, which is in the Great Victorian Desert. but the people thought otherwise. This was their first step in moving back to country to live. The Spinifex people received compensation from a government royal commission into the atomic tests at Maralinga, and they brought machinery, hired contractors, and pushed the road from Yakadunya through to Junjunjara. And because of cultural reasons, a senior elder walked in front to map out the route so as not to disturb sites of significance, and at the same time to be close to waterholes and the best route through the sandhills. So behind him came a bulldozer, then a loader, then a grader, and then the Spinifex people. And that's how we returned to country, Junjunjara. My brother was a child when we walked back into country. He was walking behind the senior elder who was putting markers down for the bulldozer to see what route he would bulldoze. My brother remembers picking up the markers and playing with them as he walked behind the senior elder, and the bulldozer driver did not know which way to go. He remembers the senior elder growling him as he had to walk back and retrace his steps for the machinery. Much later, we looked at satellite images of the land that we had graded through just to check out the geology of the land, and it turned out that the senior elder had picked the best route to put the road in. So, talk about knowing land and knowing country. So it really was an amazing achievement. So once my people got to Junjunjara, the community put in a bore of water, and from there the community developed. Yes, the Spinifex people had returned to their homelands in the 1980s. In doing so, they found the southern part of their country converted into a nature reserve. The northern third lease, leased to First Nation peoples living to the north, and the centre vacant crowned land, meaning it belonged to the Queen of England. The Spinifex people were upset. They had never seen the Queen of England cleaning out rock holes on their country. Regardless, the Spinifex people got to work. They built a community store, medical centre, schools, workshop, different types of workshops, mechanical workshops and that, and of course built the women's centre. And then the old people began to take the younger ones out bush, and so began an education program to educate young ones about our land, our customs, our law, our tukulva. And I've got to say that's my Auntie Marilyn sitting in the foreground there. So to cut a long story short, in 1994, the Spinifex people employed an anthropologist to assist them in their native title claim to the High Court of Australia. There was a lot of field work looking at rock holes, telling the anthropologist the name of the rock holes and the creation stories connected to the rock holes, telling the anthropologist about the song lines and how they connect people and country together, how they were our travel routes, and we began painting our country and produced beautiful artworks that have been exhibited internationally. We used art to name, record, and register every bit of country for our native title claim. And on the 23rd of November 2000, my people, the Billa Spinifex people, the forgotten people, were acknowledged by the High Court of Australia as the traditional owners of the land, and therefore had native title rights over their lands, which covers 55,000 square kilometres of land east of Kalgoorlie in the Great Victoria Desert. Gemma. And I just want to say that the pink painting is telling the story of our land and part of the handover. This one's a men's painting. And then the next painting is a woman's painting, which is also telling, a similar story of land and country, rock holes and that. So, my people survived the atomic tests, even though thousands of people died as a result of radiation poisoning. And I really should say that my grandmother, my Gabli, she died from radiation poisoning. Before she travelled back towards that way where the atomic tests were happening, the native, the welfare people stole my dad from Rawlinna. And so, my dad survived. Otherwise, if he had went back with his mother, he would have died too. So my dad was stolen generation and lived at Norseman Mission. And my dad's mother and the younger brother died from the radiation poisoning. So anyway, the native title framework, the native title determination has given Dundundara community a strong framework in which we have planned for economic dependence based on the fact that we have exclusive possession to the land, and going along quite well. We've set up at Kalgoorlie, we've set up petrol station, an art centre. We get a lot of tourists going through that way. Also with our schools, the children's learning is culturally based, and they do things like go out on country, and they for the last few years they've been measuring the heat of the country, and over the years the children have discovered that the earth is actually warming up. And so it's really quite interesting and important work that that our youth are doing. And they do things like measure, like, after we do our burn-offs and then the new growth starts, and they, measure plants and, how quick they grow for our different seasons and that, and of course do the temperature of the ground at the same time. And, working out the impact of the earth warming to our vegetation. So, the other thing I should say is that our artwork from out there is internationally known. And like the first time Spinifex people held an exhibition in London, the work sold out. And the artwork, but their artworks, like they sell for 80,000 and that, and all their artwork sold out. So, they certainly are developing economic independence. But now another serious issue is looming for us in Western, for us Western Nullarbor people. And I should say that our bloodlines are Spinifex, Dundundara, Pilki, and Anangu. Uranium miner Vimy Resources were given exploration approval to search for uranium deposits near Mulga Rock. I want to say that the land in which they are searching on is home to some very special desert animals, such as the mountain devil, the pygmy possum, the night parrot, the rainbow bee eater, the southern marsupial mole, just to name a few. And I had to include this image, I like it, that it's another image of the southern marsupial mole eating a lizard. And the southern marsupial mole, he's a real greedy little character. And I'll quickly tell you, in a creation story, he was just eating everything, making a real pig of himself. And the porcupine echidna said, well, you better not eat me, because if you do, my spikes will pierce your eyes. And Mr. Mole, he ate Mr. Porcupine, and his spikes pierced Mr. Mole's eyes, and that is why the desert sand mole today, burrows underground, and he's blind and he can't see, but he's got, very good, strong sense of smell, and he's still greedy. So, but our concern with this mining and that out here is that there are underground water supplies, as well as these beautiful creatures. And as we know, uranium mining uses lots of water. If our water is used, we are concerned that the animals and plants will suffer. For example, in land not far away, grass trees grow, and these plants are so unique, and we do not want to see them disappear. And the land where Vimy want to mine is land covered in golden sand dunes that reflects light beautifully in the early morning and late afternoon. In my culture, it is women's land. No men were allowed to come onto our land because we did our own thing there, women's business. And the Seven Sisters songline passes through there. This land is special because the golden coloured sands heal illnesses. The sand is extremely soft and is a different colour to the strong orange desert sands. When you see this land, a peacefulness washes over you. My Gapali, my grandmother, would take my dad there when he was a child, and Dad and other children played on the soft dunes while their mothers would bury themselves in the sand and let the heat of the sand heal their aches and pains, and they would use the sands to massage their bodies. So the minerals in the sand would assist in healing ailments. This Mulga Rock project is advancing with Vimy Resources lodging a works approval. Vimy have raised 27 million, which is not enough to fully start a mine, but enough to do some serious damage. And they intend to try to demonstrate substantial commencement before the environmental approvals expire in December the 16th, 2021. Nuclear-free WA campaign focused on addressing what is substantial commencement with the Department of Water and Environment. And the Mulga Rock project is our main focus between now and December the 16th, because they are tenacious and aggressive and ideologically driven, and they, Vimy, they do present a real risk. So the campaign is in mobilising people for rapid response pending government response on approvals, and we are urging not to extend any approvals. We are hoping to hold a camp at Mulga Rock in October in the lead up to Vimy Resources AGM in November, and we expect many people to support traditional owners and protest at the AGM, which is held in Perth. So I hope you found it interesting, our story and our fight for, environmental justice, social injustice, and our recognition as the sovereign peoples of our lands. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. Give a clap for Debbie. And if you have any questions, please type them in the chat below. And yeah, I'd just like to say thank you so much, Debbie, for that. That was wonderful. And to just see the enduring connections to country that your people have. like the animals to the sands to, you know, mapping your country through art. Like, it's just so wonderful and beautiful. And yeah, it was so educational for me to learn more about your people's history and the activism you're doing now in terms of Mulga Rock, and how, you know, the nuclear free starts a lot with uranium, you know, being used for weapons and all that type of thing. So yeah, thank you so much for that. We have a question here from, sorry, I'm just seeing a few pop up. We've got one from Dimity. Thank you, Debbie, for so generously sharing these stories. Are there places we can learn more on how to support your current struggle against the proposals for Mulga Rock?
You can get in touch with KA, who's, you know, one of the main organisers and gets us all, you know, moving and that. I think this is her work number, so she won't mind me giving this number out. I'll just type the number in. It's 0401 909 332. And so KA, like, we have people from, you know, all around Australia. Jem's been here in some of our protests, and we've even had people come from overseas. So there's all sorts of things that KA can suggest.
Wonderful. And we've got another question from Kirsten McRuvey. So thank you so much, Debbie. That was an incredible presentation. My question is about how country is recovering after nuclear testing. Is it still recovering?
It's still recovering. It's blocked off and can't go onto that land. So the closest we can be to that country at Maralinga is Oak Valley. Yeah, so it's a no-go zone.
Yeah. A question I have is, what does victims assistance and environmental remediation in terms of the treaty mean to you? Or as well, this is privately messaged.
Oh, so just read that again.
So what does victims assistance and environmental remediation mean to you as an Indigenous woman in terms of the treaty?
I think it's very important. I have to think about that a bit more. I just can't answer that straight away. But I know that with Mulga Rocks, I have at our next native title meeting, because we still, the Western Nullarbor native title group, we're still setting that up. And so we've already said in our group, you know, no uranium mining. But the thing that we need to look at is, like, I think compensation, you know, for country that's been destroyed, so that, because I mean, they're supposed to, you know, the mining companies are supposed to rehabilitate as they go along, but as we know, they don't do that. And so if we got some form of compensation, we would be able to do that when, you know, when we set up properly and we have ranges and that. But I guess our first thing is to make sure that mining doesn't happen. And I've forgotten the other part of the question.
Yeah, it's victims assistance and environmental remediation, but I think you've definitely covered it there.
Yeah.
And then I'll just